Will the traditional college campus even be relevant in the future? Today, it seems that everything in higher education is in question. Now, more than ever, it's important for us to have those tough conversations about what the future holds. Join me as I talk to the placemakers, those professionals who are in the business of making college campuses places where people want to be. Each week, we'll explore the future of the college campus in a very uncertain world. From the Collective Good podcast, this is the Placemakers series by MSCU, and I'm your host, TJ Logan. Thank you. You're actually joining me at what is my favorite part of the week, and it's when I get to hang out with my friends who are much cooler and smarter than your friends, and they know a whole lot of stuff, and I'm just lucky to be here and hear from them. Today, we're hanging out with Alan and Mary and Jim, and we're talking about this notion of what is the world going to look like, particularly in higher education, particularly in student housing on the college campus in a post-COVID-19 world. And I know I've talked with you guys over the last couple of days and over the last couple of weeks. And what I'm finding is there's two sort of pools of people. There are people who are in this camp of, well, when things return to normal. And then there are people like me that are like, well, we're not returning to normal. We're going to return to something very, very, very different. And so I'd just love to kick us off or continue our conversation really with, where do you fall? What camp are we in? And what's that going to mean for us to be normal or not normal? I tend to think we're not going to land anywhere that looks like where we've been, at least not for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. Well, I'm just hopeful that, cheers, TJ. And, I'm just hopeful that we all get back to class in the fall, because I wonder, how this wave is going to affect us. And we talk about coming into class in the fall, but it may really be January 2021.
Yeah, I saw that article yesterday, particularly in the Boston area, that they're talking about that. And that's a new twist, right? Like, what is that going to mean for us if we don't come back until January? What does that mean? That's devastating to higher education potential.
Yeah. So I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but I think that's a thing that, people were whispering and now starting to be in the public eye a little bit more. But the new normal is going to be one where we still provide value to our students, and we still provide that sense of community and that ability for students to interact with other students who are very different than them. That's the beauty and the value of a residential education. But it will look different than what we know it today, and how we program it and how we attend to those students.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned the word community. And so to a certain degree, the idea of getting people together, which is truly the advantage of going to a university and interacting with your peers, is probably the one thing that's going to be challenged the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that, and we could talk about a whole variety of different things, but right now people are in their own homes, and so they're with 2-3 other people, their roommates or whatever. And I think that might be the new unit in essence. So when you come back to school, maybe it's not the idea of I want to touch everyone on campus all the time. Maybe I just want a comfort zone with this small grouping of cohorts that I've gotten to know them, I trust them, and I feel comfortable with them.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's maybe coming back, it's going to be smaller pockets of people, and not necessarily big wide campus events all the time.
Yeah, and I wonder what that means for residence life, for residence education, for sense of belonging. Everything that we've always done, Alan said this the other day, that we've spent our entire lives as housing folks really trained and trying, whether it be from a design perspective like you, Jim, or from a practitioner perspective like Alan, or even an association perspective like Mary. We've spent the entirety of our careers bringing people together. That's the premise of our work. And now you're talking about this paradigm shift where it's about, well, be together but a little further apart. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to turn that corner. And I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's the business model. I mean, maybe there aren't 3 and 4 kids and students in a room anymore. Maybe it's just 2 with one bathroom. You can say kids, it's okay. Yeah, they're all kids to me. They're my grandkids are older than them. But I think the model, that financial model, how many students are housed together? how many share a bathroom. All that is going to be different. And we started seeing that. I mean, we started seeing that just from the expectations that students had coming onto campus.
But how do we get there? Because the Guardian report talked about where we are with facilities right now, which is we're facilities are the biggest ship on the ocean, the hardest thing to turn on the planet, and so we're not by any stretch of the imagination nimble as an entity.
Yeah.
How do we get that? How do we make that turn?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that's happened on our campus because of this experience has been a real breaking down of silos. And I hope that's the new normal as we kind of start to create that, that the color of money is maybe one color and it's all used for greatest need, as opposed to it's mine and it's yours and it's now, as long as what's theirs is mine and what's mine is mine, I'll be fine with that.
I was going to say,
but
you're the auxiliary, Alan. You're going to be giving up all your money.
But we have to get through that, and I think this has taught us that we can. And we do well when we do. Now, what's the next flavor of that as we get into this new normal, this new reality?
So, and are you talking RFPs? Are you talking like Kansas did with sort of their whole core project where they did everything, or Western Michigan with the RFP that went out that really asked for just throw everything at us. We want a hotel and we wanted this and we wanted that and we wanted everything. Is it that, or is it something else?
Is it that in the P3 model, or is it just one big borrow to solve a bunch of problems on campus? Self-funded, but we realize that we don't just go borrow for a residence hall in a union, but we put it together. We figure out how to do it together. We figure out how to fund it together so that it's not dependent on any one income. It's not dependent on any one group using it. And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't even know if it works. But I think it would be an interesting conversation for us to have as a campus and as a higher education entity.
From a design standpoint, that's a really interesting statement, because when you start to do silos, like for academics or fitness or student housing, and they're all individual buildings, a lot of those silos, they attract all the students on campus. So like an academic building, that's classrooms for the entire campus. If you were to look at student housing and say, add some of these additional components to that student housing, but at a much smaller scale and a little more convenient, once again, I think it starts to downsize the touch that you have on so many people on campus to a smaller grouping. In the 21st century project, it would be called the village, right? So if that village had a bunch of components to it that would allow you to be familiar with the people who use those different program elements, that could be a way of regulating your exposure and getting and dealing with the anxiety of maybe getting too close to too many people.
Do you think that we need, again, I tend to think that these paradigm shifts in higher ed were happening no matter what, and that this all expedited that. The financial model was not sustainable, the facilities were not sustainable, the ROI was not there anymore, and so we had to turn a corner at some point, and that it's expedited. However, what I'd hate to see us do is swing the pendulum all the way to the other side, and then in 10, 15 years, now we're stuck with some other facilities that aren't going to work for us. I mean, what do we think the temperature is on how long the social distancing is going to be important? Jim, you talked the other day about an amenity of health and safety, thinking of it from that perspective, which is a really interesting lens. How long is that a thing?
I almost think that health and wellness is going to be a thing moving forward for a long time. I mean, it's not only the COVID-19, but it's just the kind of mental health of the students and dealing with a whole bunch of different anxieties. So if we can focus on great sustainable design that provides comfortable spaces, but I would say, TJ, the most important word here is flexible. Because once again, if I can move further away from some people, if I feel anxious, but also move closer together if I'm working with a familiar group. I mean, I do believe we have to create an environment that is comfortable, that's focused on health and wellness, that allows students to really regulate their own connections.
Jim, I think that the coronavirus is putting a pin into a trajectory that we've been seeing for a long time. So we can now name it. And we can blame it maybe on the coronavirus, but for a while, we have been seeing students who need their own space that needs to be flexible, students who want to be able to be fluid, moving in and out. And, this is giving us that moment to call it safety, health, wellness, which is what this generation of students wants. They are less around the amenities that tends to make all the news in the press. But the reality is, this group of students, the lazy river. They're more about the value and about being, taking care of themselves, and they understand that, and they can articulate that in ways that other generations were never able to do that.
I also wonder, though. I mean, this has not been cheap for any of us, and
right. That's where I was going to go.
The economic recovery is still unknown, and the depth is still, I think, yet to be determined. And affordability was hard before. And it was hard with double room rates, and it was hard with triples. And, if we're talking, more privacy, less density, it sounds great. I worry about, we're not going to be starting at zero, and I wouldn't even say we were at zero before this whole thing, but we're going to be even further away from good financially. And so it'll be an interesting calculus as to how we get there.
So that to me, that's the big audacious sort of question. We talked a little bit before we went live about this notion of relevance. What does it mean to be relevant? And I just have this nagging thing in my head about, is it relevant to have a traditional college campus anymore? Particularly in the wake of this, when students start to do things online and they start to look at the price tag. And there was a blog post the other day where a professor said, look, a kid pays $50,000 and now the jig is up, because they're seeing what portion of that $50,000 in tuition is really what the value is in my teaching, and then what the rest of it is Frisbee and the quad and some other things that are happening. Is sense of place, is the traditional college, is going to be relevant anymore? Or do we have to shift to make it relevant? And that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, I think, as Mary said, we've seen symptoms of this even before this. I mean, we haven't seen full stadiums, even at some of our most powerhouse football programs. And, and so I think we've seen signals. Whether we paid attention or not is another question. But I also think, is it, Mary was talking about her office having hoteling space. Is it hoteling kinds of residence halls where you come for your 2-week face-to-face and then you go back and do the rest of your coursework online? And it's a much more dynamic experience. That 2 weeks while you're there is chock full of opportunity to do all kinds of things you can't do in a distance world.
You just rotate people in.
And just kind of coming through. I don't know.
But, that actually could be a compliment to the students you have on your campus. This whole experience about distant learning and really doing all these functions online, I think could expand the outreach institutions have on the public. I mean, I do believe the value of having the bricks and mortar and being at a campus is invaluable, and that social interaction and that peer support. However, taking this new technique that a lot of schools have had to perfect and reaching out to a broader audience, I think could be a really good thing for the country as a whole. Absolutely. And maybe the hoteling could help to give that complement, but still provide additional education to a lot more students.
Well, you said flexibility, and and it could be both and, as opposed to either or. That we have a really dynamic campus that has all these elements in it, and then we find a way to leverage the mostly distance people with the mostly bricks and mortar group, and what do they have to say to one another? Because my sense is they will be very different students at different places in life potentially.
Yeah.
Is there a really unique opportunity there to leverage that?
And we've seen our student populations change in economic downturns, right? And that could be something that happens here. What does this do to alumni? What happens? Mary, you the other day mentioned sort of moments in history where we've seen college campuses fade off the radar a little bit, and what the implications were. What does this mean to the long-term ecosystem of what's going to happen here?
Yeah, well, when you think about, how much of our universities are funded by the very, very generous alumni and friends. And, they want to give back to a place that has changed their life, where they fell in love. Where that professor is the one who took that extra time to teach them something that got them over the hurdle, and now they are an engineer, they are working in a applications, whatever it might be. And moments in time certainly have demonstrated, for instance, the Vietnam War, where we saw the upheaval on campuses, and you can look at many universities' trajectory of alumni giving, and that year all of a sudden is a gap tooth in the curve because the experience wasn't very good. They lost their traditions. They lost some of those, end of year moments in time. And so, on the residence life side, people are starting to think about the new normal. To your first question, TJ, what does it look like when we bring students back? Well, we need to remember these students, these seniors, may not have had a commencement. They may not have had a senior prom. They didn't get to do tag day and the student trip and all of that. And it's not that we need to recreate that, but they are going to be longing for that sense of community. And because of that, I think the residential campus has a great future.
Absolutely.
But so, I mean, how should practitioners be preparing? Because I think everything I read now is how do you survive right now, right? What do you do with your hall directors, and what do you do to work from home, and what do you do to turn your residence hall into a health facility? And that's all good stuff. But I'm wondering, how do we take our leadership who are practitioners, and what would your advice be to them to be ready, whether it's in fall or in spring or maybe later than that, God forbid? What things should they be doing now to open with some relevance as we come around this corner?
It's a great
everybody
question.
Quiet. Look at that.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Alan takes a big drink and we sit back. Right, because that's the like.
It is.
Instead of being reactive and what should we be doing at this moment? Because a lot of us are sitting there on a massive deficit. We've just given millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in refunds, right? So the financial model is just blown out of the water. The government program to bail that out isn't even close to matching what the losses are. So revenue generation is going to be critically important over the next decade. And we don't know what enrollment's going to do or not going to do. And we're sitting on a staff whose jobs are about being in face-to-face and being with our students. What could we do right now to position ourselves best? Because I tend to look at this as an opportunity, but how do we take advantage of
it? So I think the first thing is we have demonstrated we do not need to be face-to-face for everything.
Right.
I love that Mary's lights keep going out, by the way. She's in a motion sensor room for those watching live. And the lights go up here. It's fantastic.
Yeah, the sun's coming down, so it's getting darker and darker. But, we have demonstrated not only that we're really nimble as campus housing professionals to do everything that we needed to do, but now everybody has been sent home to work. And we are still building a sense of community. It's different. We are still engaging with those students who are at risk. And you know what? We're able to do it at times that are different than traditional office hours, and in a way that it kind of sort of is working. So I hope on the other side of this, we don't lose sight of this fact that not everybody needs to be physically in the same place, but rather we could be scattered. And we can work different hours to accommodate students and to accommodate, quite frankly, our professionals who are very stressed during this time.
So do you think then that calls for us to really push on, again, I think a long overdue change, the entry-level professional preparation and graduate programs and all those things? Because I think we're now talking about a different kind of professional potentially than what we've traditionally trained folks for in the field. What does it mean, if you have hall directors who their job has been trained in student development and face-to-face interaction, but what is the shift in dynamic to Kevin Kruger mentioned the other day on a webinar, hey, if I were a vice president, I'd restructure my staff to be focused on retention of the most vulnerable students and change the whole game plan up. But does that call for us to really shift everything that feeds that system of professionals? Yeah, I'm gonna get skewered for that, by the way. Everybody who's got a master's degree in student affairs is gonna hate me for that.
That's right. I have one, and I don't hate you. So
thank you, Alan.
Absolutely. But I do think the face-to-face nature of that, it won't go away. So we'll still leverage it, but it's a both and, right? We're going to add another skill set to that equation, and how do we leverage that? I think one of the things we're trying to do on our campus is not just think about how do we solve the moment, but is there a way to solve the moment with an eye on the future? for example, there's a building that we're thinking of renovating. It's a prime candidate then to be a host for a stand-up shelter that we may need to do, because maybe we never bring it back online, and we take the money, if we get any, from the reno and put it into the bigger project cost. So there may be some really smart ways to make decisions to use real estate in the short term that capitalizes on long-term goals. I also think, that some of our most vulnerable folks that you've talked about before, ironically, have been our online people. And so how is it that we retool student services into an online mode to reach out to those folks? And ironically, we're talking about what's the residential component to an online experience, which I think is a new frame for us, and one that I think has all kinds of potential.
Yeah.
And I would just add, if you're thinking about how to prepare for the students coming back, I really would assess the buildings that you have. I think that you're going to have, one size does not fit all of the students who come back. There are going to be students of various behaviors and various desires in terms of relationship with other people, and really look at, I think, sustainable design as well. When you're looking at a renovation, check the mechanical system. What's the pressurization in the hall? Is this something that we could, in a pure state of resiliency, can we convert this building into a quarantine in the future? I actually think that will be part of selling your institution and your housing going forward, because people want to feel safe. And if you can say, these are the proactive measures that we took to ensure safety in the building, I think students would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I've spent the past 3 weeks describing why our buildings don't become isolation and quarantine places easily, because that's not how they were designed. They were designed to force interaction and to increase the opportunity for people to spend time with one another. Very different reality potentially moving forward.
It is. I think safety has always been really important, and this just frames it in a little different way. Does it do something to the value proposition, Jim, in terms of, the cost on some of those facilities might be higher, and so you're going to pass it along at a higher cost potentially, unless I'm wrong. Does that do something to the value proposition of living on campus, on a college campus?
Well, I think you have two.
Or are we just swapping amenities?
Well, to a certain degree, you might be swapping priorities, right? When you look at environmental health and wellness, it's both for the person, but it's also for the global environment. So I think your student population coming in, this is a highlighted priority. And if we can pass that priority onto the students who are actually living and breathing in that building, just simple ideas like promoting natural ventilation, reducing energy, providing environments that feel and have an exchange of air, pressurizing the building at key parts, social distancing flexibility that can be customized the way you see fit. It maybe mixing up some of the uses that you were talking about earlier, and bringing in some academic components, some fitness components, and making it something that is a lot more convenient and a lot more familiar to students.
So one of the things that I'm curious about is, does this change at all in your mind some of the dynamics between the private partners, the public-private partnerships, whether that be from a housing lens, from a retail lens, from a, Alan talked about being one whole campus, breaking down some of the silos, and to me that also implies seeking out additional revenue streams and leveraging the scale of your portfolio as an entity, as a university, much more thoughtfully. Do you think this changes the dynamic of those relationships and some of the strategic planning exercises that go with it?
I do, and TJ, you and I were talking earlier, that part of the P3 equation for an institution is risk mitigation.
Yeah,
and I think risk mitigation has taken on a whole new definition potentially. It's not just financial risk, but there's a whole lot of other risks that we're going to need to factor in there. And the other side of risk mitigation is control. And I think we have seen a lot of benefits now from institutions who control their own buildings, control refunds, control all the different aspects, as opposed to having to go through a third-party contract or other things that they need to think about. And so I think the balancing act that we have tried to do before, and the things that have been important in that calculus are going to need to be rethought potentially.
So do you think it's likely we lean toward more control, i.e. taking on more risk again?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great
Prognosticate, Alan. Come on.
I think we will. I mean, as a campus that has a public-private partner that has really, I think, stepped over themselves in order to really be a good partner with us and act like the university is acting. But I know that's not true on all my friends' campuses. And so I think as we review all this and we reassess what's most important to us, and if the ability to control the student experience, control refunds, control that design, it'll be an interesting question.
And I think what this really highlights is the nature of relationships, maybe, and us being versed in the nature of relationships, make sure we're planning for the right types of relationships for the right types of outcomes on our campus potentially.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm sure about is it won't just be about the financial model. It never has, but I think it's going to take on the non-financial elements of this, the control, the who supports the housekeepers, the who, all of those things will become very important as people have long memories for the pain points of this pandemic.
Yeah, how long till we really find our way out of this financially? I mean, it could be decades, right? It could take a long time, and that's why I think this is such a big turning point, is because of the dollars attached to it. You're not able to ignore it as an institution or as an industry anymore.
Well, going back to what you said about history, TJ, if you think about how long has it taken us to get out of 2008?
Yeah.
A long time. And this feels like it is a lot deeper, not a little bit deeper, especially the longer it goes on.
Yeah.
You also asked about what opportunities may be in this. I mean, I don't think we've seen yet what the cost of capital will look like, but it could be a really good opportunity as our endowments are going back underwater like they were in 2008. But is there a real opportunity to borrow cheaply? The trick there will be, is the labor market there to support all the opportunities that may be there. But I think that's again an unanswered question yet, but a real thing to keep our eye on.
And you don't know if to what degree do you feel comfortable fully inviting the student population back? Is it through testing? Is it through a flu shot, or is it through some other means? I think it's going to be somewhat of a graded scale, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what type of defense we have against this virus.
It's a really good point, and that just had an aha moment for me when, right now, when someone had the flu, when your roommate had the flu, we kind of said, well, you live with them while they have the flu. I don't know that that's going to be possible for the next 10 years, because they're going to expect us to have a place probably to put that sick person, let alone the opportunity for that well person to go somewhere else while their roommate heals. I just don't think people are going to have the tolerance for hanging out with people who aren't well.
Well, it's really changed the most valuable buildings on our campus, right? It used to be the most valuable. It was pretty financially easy to do the math, right? Traditional buildings that were paid off made a whole bunch of money. But in a quarantine, they were almost useless to us functionally. You couldn't keep people together. The airflow was bad. And places that had independent bedrooms or quarantined apartments on their own air handling, like those became super valuable to us. At that cost, of course, but it's interesting how the value of the building changed in the ecosystem of our inventories, right?
That is true, and wouldn't it be smart to do that evaluation and to see what kind of stock you have available?
Yeah. Fantastic.
And I wonder, we always have a lot of pressure from parents, but in this time, as students come back, the kind of pressure from parents who will be paying so much more. And especially for those parents who have lost their jobs, those parents where the financial stability of the home isn't there anymore, and the safety of their child is even more heightened. So I think this idea of, the students might say, my roommate has the flu, I'll stay with them. I don't think it's not a go for the parents.
That's right.
It's non-negotiable.
Well, and that point that Jim made really strikes to the heart, that demonstrating safety as an amenity and as the value add to on-campus housing, not just in the ways that we've traditionally talked about safety, but now from a health and wellness perspective,
Right.
I think will become critically important. I think what Alan talked about in terms of being a comprehensive campus that doesn't worry about the color of money and the source of money is going to become incredibly important. I think thinking about the way we engage people and where they're going to be in the timeline of being our alumni, it's all incredibly important. You all, I promised you, because everybody's got schedules and things like that. I want to, no podcast is good after 30 minutes, so I wanted to get things wrapped up for us here. Are there any parting thoughts anybody wants to share before we depart the live stream? Anybody?
No, I could say stay well.
Stay well, right. Yeah. I hope you all stay well. I appreciate you joining me in quarantine, joining me at home. I will say cheers and thank you. This has been my favorite part of the week, whereby there, he's got one. He's ready to go. Again, my friends are smarter than yours, and I love that we're able to share them with you tonight. So thank you all for tuning in, and look for the podcast. We're gonna have a much more polished up file that's going to go on the YouTube channel. It's going to be available in podcast formats wherever you get your podcasts. And next week we're talking about unions. So thank you and have a wonderful night. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If there is anything we are learning during this quarantine, it's that content is king. Whether you're a higher ed pro who wants to start a podcast or a private student housing company who wants to host a webinar or virtual event, you want to do it with high quality. You want to align your brand with high quality audio, video, and stream live events that your customers deserve. Do what I did. Turn to our friends at Duo Studios. These guys can do it all. From streaming esports to hosting live events and making podcasting simple enough even I can do it. Make Duo Studios your partner in producing high quality content. Visit them today for a consult at duostudios.org/placemakers. That's Duo Studios, DUO Studios.org/placemakers.